Good stuff. Right, I'll try and get through this as quick as I can. I'm convinced that if I'm still preaching when I'm 35, it'll probably take about 37 hours to get through a preach, if we go with the progression of how things work. So I will try and be as quick as I can. I've had an interesting week in the respects of I've found that often when you're struggling with the issues of life, you have a certain empty feeling, and we desperately try and fill that emptiness. And yet what I've realized is the whole beauty of the focus of Christ is, to some degree, we need to have that emptiness, because if we don't have that emptiness, we have no zest and longing for God to fill us. And yet in life, we seem to constantly try and fill it with stuff. And this is the whole paradox of actually serving Christ, is he wants to fill us, but actually it's already done with his mercy and grace and because of the gift of the cross. And yet it's also embracing that emptiness at the same time to allow God ultimately for you to continually rely upon him and not rely on your own self-sufficiency, if that makes sense. So that's where I'm at, and to some degree that's where I'm basing this preach on tonight. I'm going to talk to you about truth and what truth means. Now, if we were to go into every single ins and outs of what truth is, I guarantee you'd be here for weeks. So obviously we've got to try and make it kind of focused on one specific point, which I'm going to do. So we're going to start by just looking through quite a few scriptures to set the scene. So we've got John 8, verse 32, which is our root scripture tonight, and it's in the Amplified. So Jesus said to those Jews who had believed in him, "If you abide in my word, hold fast to my teachings and live in accordance with them, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free." Fabulous scripture. If you can put up the next slide. Psalm 86, verse 11. "Teach me your way, O Lord, that I may walk and live in your truth. Direct and unite my heart solely reverently to fear and honor your name." Next slide. Psalm 51, verse 6. "Behold, you desire truth in the inner being. Make me therefore to know wisdom in my inmost heart." Ephesians 4, verse 15. "Rather let our lives lovingly express truth in all things, speaking truly, dealing truly, living truly." Next one. John 1, verse 17. "For while the law was given through Moses, grace," which is unearned, undeserved favor and spiritual blessing, "and truth came through Jesus Christ." Two more. 1 John 1, verse 8. "If we say we have no sin, refusing to admit that we are sinners, we delude and lead ourselves astray, and the truth, which the gospel presents, is not in us," as in brackets said, "does not dwell in our hearts." Everyone, and then, sorry, the last scripture, John 18, verse 37. "Everyone who is of the truth, who is a friend of the truth, who belongs to the truth, hears and listens to my voice." Quite a lot of scriptures there, yeah? Did you get them all? And there are heaps more. These are just the ones that I wanted to pick out tonight. So would you look at that and believe then that there's something about the word truth and the importance of truth, that whoever's writing in these books, whether it be Paul, whether it be David, whoever, is trying to get across an important point, that truth is an important element of our lives. Now we have an issue because truth in our world is a very subjective thing. Each of us, to some degree, holds our own perspective on what we believe to be truth. Now, there's a modern statement, I don't know whether you've heard it before, there is no such thing as truth. Yeah? Some people say it, some people don't, but it is a saying. Now, if you say that saying, there is no such thing as truth, and this is where it gets interesting, in that case, that statement is neither true. Because if there's no such thing as truth, neither is that statement true. So, if nothing is truth, does anybody cringe out at that thought? If nothing is truth, how on earth do we live our lives? What do we base our beliefs, our perspectives, our decisions, our choices on if nothing is truth? Which is ultimately tonight what I'm going to try and help you with, of understanding how we do have a truth, and it's a solid reality, and that's what I hope we come to from this preach tonight. So unless there is some concrete truth which expresses in itself an ultimate form of reality, that which everything aligns itself to, then things get very messy. Now also, with truth, and I believe this, truth in the real sense births community, and to some degree, as the Rock, that's what we want. We want everything to be focused on truth, under truth, by truth, so we all come together as an incredible community. And that's, here at the Rock, what we desire to be. Another thing I was thinking, 1 + 1, what does it equals? too. It's a reality. And doesn't it feel nice when you know that's what it equals? Yeah? Well, there is a better formula than that for your life that brings absolute and total freedom, which we're going to look at now. So what is this central truth that I'm talking about? John 14, verse 6, I don't know whether I've got a slide for it, says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Now, truth, in a lot of the scriptures that I read to you, actually, if you noticed how it's written with a capital letter, yeah, which means we're not talking about something, we're talking about someone, which is very, very important. Now, obviously, most of you will get with the gist. This someone is Christ. So truth equals Christ. Truth doesn't equal anything else other than Christ. This is the ultimate reality of what truth is. Why do we need it? Why do we need truth? Reason being is because truth, and get this point, truth reveals what is real. Okay? Truth reveals what is real. Now let me put this in kind of context for you. Jesus, it says in the Bible, the Word became flesh and dwelt amongst us. That in itself was truth, revealing what was real, because in reality, what was being revealed was the reality of God, which up to that point, people had held a very, very different perspective as what they believed the truth to be. For instance, God was a God who judged, a God who condemned, a God who everything had to be kept in line, or he'd strike you with a lightning bolt. Yeah? But all of a sudden, the Word became flesh, Jesus came along, was called truth, and all of a sudden, the perspective of everybody else was challenged, which must have been quite tough. So, do we want to live in the realm of reality? Yay, nay? Okay, I would say no, we don't. But we should. Okay? Well, I mean, let's not lie, come on. Living in reality when things are revealed and brought to surface is pretty painful. So we don't need to get all like holier than thou. Oh, yes, Lord, refine me. It's tough. It really is tough. But it should be our desire. Yeah? Now, get this, and some of you need to get this point. It's not about nice truth. Okay? It's about full truth, no matter what that looks like. Okay? Some of us believe that truth has to look pretty. Okay, and I'm going to get to this because a lot of things that Jesus said, it wasn't pretty. Yeah? He challenged a lot of preconceived ideas of what people had, yet he lived in full truth no matter, ultimately his truth took him to the cross. Yeah? So we have to remember that. Here's a question to think about. Is an alcoholic an alcoholic? You're all looking at me as if like, are you crazy? Is an alcoholic an alcoholic? Yes. Okay? I love the whole thing of Alcoholics Anonymous. I think the way it's set up is absolutely incredible. You go in there, right? If they ask you, what are you? And you say, I'm somebody who, I drink quite a bit. No, I didn't ask that question. I said, who are you? Oh, well, I do like the liquor. No, I didn't ask that question. Who are you? Unless you say, I am an alcoholic, they don't believe that you are ready to start the process of healing. And what I'm trying to get across to you here, it's so important that we call a thing what it is if we're ever going to come to truth. There's a guy who writes something, that's helpful, isn't it? Called something. It's a book called I Told Me So. I don't know who writes it, but it's an incredible book. And he talks about a concept called the renaming of sentiments. And what that means is, for instance, a lot of people who are depressed say, I'm just depressed because I'm just so unhappy with my past. When actually you diagnose it, they're actually very angry people. But to say I'm depressed because of X, Y, Z is a lot more is nicer and a lot more accepted than if you say, actually, I'm a very angry, bitter person. Do you see where I'm coming from? Are you all right, mate?
Alcoholics don't have a drink. No, do that. Down the cell.
Oh, yeah, it is. And I'm going to get onto that, mate. It is. I'm going to tell you that in a minute, mate. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's good. We'll get onto it. We'll get onto it, mate. Keep listening. Right. Okay, so are you with me, yeah? So living in what is real is the only place where freedom can be experienced. Basically, we walk in the light. If you are... Okay, yeah, we'll move on to the next point. So the more clearly then that we see truth, which is Christ, the more clearly we view reality. So the less clearly then we see Christ, which is the truth, the less clearly we view reality. Who knows what the opposite of real is? False. Okay. So if you're not living in reality, which is under the truth of Christ being the person, we're living in falsehood. Now, this means that then we come up with terms like this: the false self, false gods, false sense of security. Is this making sense? So it's the flip side. We build our lives then, because we're not living under the truth, we build our lives based on illusions which ultimately set our direction and our course in life. How many of you, have you heard the song, Illusion Never Changed Into Something Real? Natalie Imbruglia? Yeah? Incredible song. She's got it right. Some of us are desperately trying to make illusion real, and it will never, ever happen. Okay? Brennan Manning says this, who Chris mentioned earlier, one of my most favorite writers. It's better to live naked in truth than to live clothed in fantasy. Massive statement, that. I'm going to talk now about what's called the map of reality. It's a concept that a guy called Scott Peck came up with. Who in here has used a sat-nav before? Or a GPS here in your car? Most of you know that has a software program behind it that can be updated, and it puts different roads on there and blah, 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 blah. Have any of you had it where you've been in a certain place or on a certain road and it's got lost and there's been no line? What does it do to you? You just think, you stupid machine, why are you not telling me where I'm going? And you get all panicky because you think this machine is supposed to be giving me my direction and I don't know where I'm going. Yeah? And this is why I want to talk about the map of reality, is we all have an internal map. Yeah? We're actually born with a map that was put there by our Abba Father in heaven, but the reason why we get lost is because as we grow up and as we watch what's going on around us, we gradually become conditioned to things that our parents are showing us, etc., and we start to draw our map of what we perceive life to be on those things. So from a very young age, we're already mapping out our future based on our perceptions of life around us. So we design and draw the maps based on how we have been conditioned to view life, most of the time through our parents' eyes. Now, this is where it gets interesting. If our maps are not continually revised, they also, just like a sat-nav in your car, become outdated, taking us to places we don't want to go or even exist. Right, bit of psychology for you now. There's a word called transference, okay? Just put up the next slide. Transference is a set of ways of which we perceive the world which has developed in childhood and which is usually entirely appropriate to the childhood environment, but which is inappropriately transferred into the present adult reality. Now, I have to say that's me, definitely, and some of you may understand that. But I found that a lot of years, really up to the last 2 or 3 years, I've been living my life based on a very outdated map and wondered why I felt so insecure, so lost, not knowing where I was going. Now, I'm not saying that there hasn't been times when I've got it right, but overall, my whole perception on life has been faulty because I've brought in a map into my adulthood that actually no longer fits with where I am. Does that make sense? Cool. Right. This map has been drawn, that you have drawn, is what you consider to be real and to be the real you, but actually it isn't. Now here's the problem. How we respond when one has worked incredibly hard drawing out his map, and then his map becomes contradicted or challenged. Anybody had that before? Yeah? My map is contradicted all the time. Yeah? And, you know, people who are very close to me, like Jenny, Chris, Claire, they know that, Heather even, they know that actually I'm willing to put my map on the table, and often it's challenged and contradicted, and that can wind me up no end because you just think, no, this is my map. This is what I've taken years to draw out. Don't you try and tell me that it's wrong. But actually, we need to be willing to listen to what's being said. Right, so you've got two things, two possibilities when someone contradicts your map. Is number one, we agree it needs to be redrawn, which takes effort, discipline, and time. Or number two, we disagree it needs to be redrawn, oh, the task is too daunting and overwhelming, so avoid, challenge, and hide. Anybody with that? Yeah, so you've got two choices. You agree it needs to be redrawn, or we disagree it needs to be redrawn, avoid, challenge, and hide. Now, if we're going to say it's too overwhelming to receive challenge, when you're reading the Bible and looking at the Pharisees, don't be harsh on them. Because it's interesting, when we're reading, we all of a sudden have this opinion of the Pharisees like, oh, how could they treat Jesus that way? No, that I wouldn't have been like that. When actually, they were having their view of life contradicted. Do you understand where I'm coming from? Now, that doesn't mean that they were right, but what I'm saying is, you know how hard it is yourself when someone contradicts your map, and ultimately that was what was happening to the Pharisees. They were upholding the very thing in which they believed was righteous and being established by their forefathers, and yet Jesus told them it was all totally wrong and a new reality needed to be grasped. Now, I would seriously question whether if Jesus was around now, how we would actually be around him. Because we often view Jesus as this person who's very meek and mild and gentle, etc., etc. But when you really look into the character and nature of Jesus, although he had compassion for people, he came to challenge people's thought processes and beliefs of what they believed about their internal map, saying there's a new way, there's a higher way, are you going to change? Pretty huge, eh? It says in the Bible, I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. And yet some of us seem to want to strive for this Jesus of peace who, everything's calm and no challenge, no confrontation. And yet he actually said, I've come to bring a sword to attack all this falsehood that's surrounding you and actually get you connected to truth, which is reality. Yeah? Is this making sense? You all with me? Good. You're very quiet tonight. Right, so who has the best track record then for contradicting people's maps? Chris. Yeah, you're definitely one of them. But I think Jesus might get the upper hand. So what was he contradicting then? He was contradicting the old map, the old covenant, the Ten Commandments, Mosaic law. Everything that everybody had been brought up to believe and base their life on, Jesus came and said, nah, it's not going to be done that way anymore. It's going to be done a different way. Yeah? Massive. The Pharisees couldn't believe the cheek of it, so basically they just denounced the information. They even said that he was working for the devil, which shows you how when your map's challenged, if you're not willing to heed the truth, how you get a very wonky perspective on things. What was beautiful about it, though, is even though Jesus confronted them and challenged people, he had compassion in the way he worked, which is wonderful. See, truth and grace have always got to work hand in hand. He never avoided the confrontation. He knew how steeped they were in their tradition, which was wonderful because to some degree, he knew why the Pharisees were the way they were. But yet he was still willing to connect on their level and say, come on guys, this is still available for you even if you're willing to see things a different way. Now this is a really important point, and I love this. Although he was trying to contradict the version they had of themselves, he was more trying to contradict the version they held of himself. Now, this is where the issue lies, because actually most of the time our struggle with truth is to do with actually how we view Jesus. It's not usually how we view ourselves, because if we're actually looking at Jesus, we'd view ourselves in the right place. So if you're here and Jesus is here, there's a possibility to bring it back to here. But it's because you're not actually seeing Jesus as he truly is. Now, another story. How offensive was it, right, when Jesus decided to go to the Jews and say, unless you eat my body and drink my blood? Have you ever thought of that? It's pretty offensive, isn't it? He knew that that was totally against every single tradition that they held. Now, would he have gone and said that to someone else? No, and this is what I want you to understand now. That specific truth wasn't for everybody. Yeah, it was contextualized. So what is a truth for one person can be a truth for another, which is the beauty of truth and the way Christ works. Because I want you to understand this point. I don't know if we've got it on a slide. Christ's truth is absolute, yet variable, variable, yet absolute. Paradoxical, which is the whole beauty of Christ. Let me set the absolute for you. God in Christ was reconciling the world to himself. That is absolute, right? The variable is, he didn't say how, he didn't say when, he didn't say who, he didn't say how. Yeah? That is all stuff that we have to trust and go with the process, yeah? Through different truths of what comes about through our lives, yeah? But the absolute truth is that he is reconciling everything to himself. How much energy do you invest in preserving your old map? Don't know about you, but I find often I can spend more time preserving my old map than actually being willing to change and become with a new map. It's like what Chris said last week about we live our lives based on past experiences and see everything through that. Until the last few years, like I was saying, I've based my life on what was handed down from my mum and dad, which was what was handed down from their mum and dad. And generationally, we've had a map that actually has got incredibly out of date, that until really this last sort of 9-year period of we really started to understand, hey, oh, there's something significantly wrong here. We need to actually get ourselves back in line with reality and who truth and Christ is. The plumb line, isn't it? The whole measuring stick for life. Now, because reevaluating our map seems quite daunting, this is what we do. We create scenarios to reinforce what we believe our map is saying, even though we have told ourselves it's outdated. So what we do is we manipulate the world around us for it to become what we need it to be. To say, it'll be more easier to change what's around me than actually have to completely take my map to the drawing board and get it back in line. It's not a good way to live. Now, I'll tell you what, that way to live makes you, and I don't know if I've got it, it brings about, I think I've got a big slide, insecurity. That's all it does. When you're constantly having to readjust things in your life to make everything work and fit to your map, you will constantly be insecure. And it is a horrible, horrible, horrible place to be. I've lived there for many years, and it's not how I want to live my life anymore. Right? So Jesus came to contradict our reality and our view of God. This is just going to start summarizing it now. So the Pharisees, who believed that they had to pass through the poshest tabernacle that was covered in gold, beautiful curtains, etc., was no longer the right route. Instead, it was the dirt road past the poor and the sinners, and let's just meet to pray on a mud patch. That's quite different, isn't it? What a change in maps. A road that had taken them through the best tabernacle on the street, all of a sudden now was going a route that they didn't even know was there. And yet Jesus was saying, why don't we now go this way instead? But it also works the other way round, because we often just look at the Pharisees, self-righteous, etc., when actually there was a whole group of other people who Jesus talks about: the prostitutes, the sinner, the thieves, the murderers, that group of people. They also had an outdated map as well, which was guilt and shame and a lack of self-worth. They felt devalued. But their map was also out of date because they were still living under an old law. So do you see how it's double-sided here? Yeah? Now, I love this because I wanted to word it as like a map. So if they were willing to update their maps, these people, the murderers, the prostitutes, the thieves, they would find missing from their maps these roads: Total Acceptance Boulevard and Undeserved Favour Lane. Great, a bit cheesy, a bit corny, hey, I know, but I have to put it in. Yeah? So both parties have to be willing to accept a new map. And a lot of the reason why we don't accept the new map is because of pride, yeah? Which is something that we all have to overcome. This is the whole point of understanding being saved and born again. It's a daily process. When we choose to become born again, the old map is eradicated. And listen to this, we reconnect with what has always been there in the first place, which was a map written from the foundation of the earth when the Lamb without blemish or defect was chosen, to say that the new law and the law that will finally be established when the time has come will be, I am writing a new law on their hearts and chiseling it in their hearts, which is the law of love. It's just absolutely fantastic, yeah? Which all along the map, really there's one route in our lives that we can take, and that is the law of love, the way of love. And if you live under the way of love, you don't really need to be going anywhere else because everything is so centered. It's incredible. This is how you know if you're real or false. Now here's a challenge. If you are operating by the real self, which is the Christ self, you will be participating in his great I am, which is what we learnt last week from Chris, which means you also, yourself, become an expression of love. So do you know how someone's living in truth? Their outworkings of life is an absolute expression of love and kindness to people. That's how you know, because ultimately you come in line with the law of love, which is imprinted on our hearts, and that's the map by which we live our lives. The only love that's in the false, hear this, is I, me, and mine. So if you find yourself constantly referring to self, me this, I this, mine, all me, the language is a big giveaway that actually, and I'm a culprit, and I know, it's, at that stage that the truth is not residing in you, like we said at the scripture at the beginning, and we don't know the truth, so it's time again for our maps to be looked at. Yeah, and ultimately, because we're not living in what is truth, we don't feel free. So 2 pointers to summarize this, just to conclude now. A life in pursuit of truth is a life in pursuit of Christ. And a life in pursuit of Christ also means a willingness to be challenged by him. People who are willing to know the truth, get this, want to ask questions, want to follow, want to communicate, want to compare, and there's no fear in any of it. It's all brought to the table as a community to share each other's journeys and where we're at. It's a wonderful thing, and that's the beauty of how, we get very trapped in these four walls, and yet when Jesus came, he was going from place to place with people connecting along the way, sitting down, eating, drinking, talking about what they were learning and understanding, and to some degree that can get lost when we're in this forum. So, how do you know that you know the truth? Very, very simple. You're free. You're free. Does anybody feel free? Completely free? It's a hard one to answer, isn't it? Because I don't feel totally free. And I want to feel totally free. So my desire tonight is that ultimately I align myself with the Christ as a person. And that I no longer look for truths with what my perception is on the basis of how I've been conformed to the pattern of this world by my old map, but transformed by the renewing of my mind, by the fact that I actually look at Christ, who is a manifestation, expression in the flesh of the reality of God in this earth, who bears the weight and the significance and the shalom, which is not an absence of conflict, but the presence of the goodness of God. That is my desire for my life. So I've summarized it really in that. If you want to know more about freedom, the preach that Chris did on freedom was absolutely incredible. I'm not going to get into that. But I hope that's helped, and I hope that's given you an understanding of truth. And actually, really, our whole life is about a pursuit of truth, which is Christ. And it's a fantastic journey. So there you have it.
Well, tie my voice in a bow and call me Mildred. Yes, it's me, off the telly, for the Rock Church. Breaking through stereotypical and faith perception boundaries and stigmas. Clearing the way for a 21st century spiritual experience. Communicating life. An ice-breaking event. Every Saturday night at 6:45. I dare you. Striving for effective communication. Unconventional by design. An evangelical Christian organization. Come and get it.